And so I want to bring a message today that's from the book of Genesis, right where we were in the book of Genesis, chapter 37, verses 1 and 2. And then we're going to look at some selected scripture, and all of the rest of the scripture, I believe, will be on the screen this morning for you to see. And I've given the message this title, From Generation to Generation. Our bylaws say that we have an annual meeting on the last Sunday of the month of October, and if it's necessary we can delay that, but that's the scheduled date for it. And we only have the one business meeting per year. We're an elder-led church, and so all the other decisions throughout the year the elders take responsibility for, but the congregation affirms the budget, the missions giving plan, and then the officers and teachers each year at this annual meeting. And I know I say it every year, and you may get tired of me saying it, but I don't get tired of saying it, is that we rejoice in the fact of what a smooth business meeting that is, and how God has blessed this church with great unity. And it's such a great blessing to have a church like this. And so that's how we do business here. And as I said, the pastor is required by the bylaws to bring this message. Now, when I preach the annual message, there's some things that I in particular look at to include in the message. The first one is what our preaching and teaching will be like for the year. We look ahead and just give you a little preview of what we're going to be preaching and teaching about from the pulpit here. What our outreach for church, there's some things that we might want to emphasize about outreach. The third thing is our fellowship. What kind of fellowship do we want to promote in the church? And the final thing is our challenge. I try to issue some type of challenge each year as part of the message. And so that's sort of the outline that we use every year. And when I begin looking for a passage to preach from, one of the first things I do is to look and see what the regular passage would have been if we had just continued right on in the book of Genesis, or whatever book we might be preaching through at that time. And I think this is about the third or fourth time over the years that when I looked to the very next text that we were going to be in, that text spoke to the very issues that I wanted to address the church about. And so that's happened again this year in Genesis 37, verses 1 and 2. And so let's read those verses. It says in verse 1, "Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan." And this is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And I want to stop right there in our reading today. Joseph was 17 years old. You notice it's interesting there. It says the history of Jacob, and the very next word is Joseph. And that first verse there, where it talks about Jacob dwelling in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan, that's intended to present a great contrast with what we had just looked at in chapter 36 with the life of Esau. And it's if God is holding it up in front of us and He's saying, do you want to be part of a life like Esau's? Do you want that to be what you're included in and who you're a part of? Or do you want to be part of Jacob? And looking from the outward appearance of things, if a person was just looking at material things and looking at prestige and all of those kind of things, a person would choose to be with Esau. He had become very prominent in the land of Edom, as we saw in that chapter. He was one who became very wealthy there. He became well known, very famous there. His children were rulers in the country and all of that. And so someone that just had no spiritual understanding and had no questions about things that related to spirituality, they would just say, yeah, well, I would much rather be in Edom's family. But as we saw it in the message at the end of chapter 36, that Edom, and as we traced out the history of Edom, we saw that Edom came to great destruction and had no eternal value whatsoever, whereas the sons of Jacob and the nation of Israel, as it came to be called, is here, the people of Israel are here to this very day. And so this verse is intended to present a great contrast, and it does. But then when you come to verse 2, you see that word history. And what is being talked about here is a generational change. A change from one generation to the next, and it comes right after that word Jacob, and it comes very quickly in this verse. It says, this is the history of Jacob. The next word is Joseph, and that word indicates to us that the rest of the book of Genesis is going to be about Joseph. He was 17 years old at this time. In the book of Genesis, up until this point, we've looked at nearly 2,100 years of history. So we're well along on planet Earth since it had been created by God. But I want us to look at that word history for just a moment and look at this verse for just a moment. That word history has sort of a multiple meaning. It can be in different contexts. It can mean different things, similar things, but yet different things. Sometimes the word could be just spoken of as an account. It's an account of someone's life. We're saying here that this would be the account of Jacob's life. The word that is most used is the word generations. These are the generations of Jacob. And that means what comes forth from him, what comes after him, what are his descendants like. And that's the next word that is sometimes used in the Old Testament. So you have account. Sometimes the same Hebrew word is translated account. Sometimes it's translated generations. Sometimes descendants. And what it ultimately all means is it's speaking about the course of history that comes after a person. And so when we come to this verse, this second verse of chapter 37, it's a marking off point. There's a point here where you say, up until now the story has been about Jacob, and in a sense it continues to be about Jacob, but it's not directly about his life, but it's about his descendant, Joseph, and that will go all the way through until the end of the book. And I couldn't help but think about how that's true in all of our lives to some extent. You know, in the early years of your life story is kind of all about you. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go to school? Who are you going to marry? What kind of job are you going to get? What kind of home are you going to buy? Where are you going to move to? Where are you going to live? What kind of car are you going to drive? Where are you going to go to church? Who your friends are going to be? And so our life story is about us, but you reach a certain point in life, and it doesn't happen just as suddenly as it does in this verse, but over a period of time, our lives become more about the next generation. And if you have children, your life becomes more about your children. And what I've found out in recent years, it really becomes more about your grandchildren. And I'm sure it's that way in your family too. But there's a generational change. And the reason I want to talk about that in the sermon today is because as we think about our church here that God has given us, God's church here, this church is facing over the next decade at least, and maybe sooner, a generational change. And there are people who have been here, they've been here in this church for a number of years and in other churches prior to that, and they've served together in other churches, and their ministry has been very effective. There's a foundation that has been laid by that generation that I think is a very strong foundation. And it's a doctrinal foundation. It's a spiritual foundation. It is also a foundation of fellowship that has been created in this church by that generation. And those of you who are younger, I think that there's a lot for you to look to from the generation that has gone before you. But in the next 10 years or so, let's just face the facts, that generation is going to be moving off the scene slowly and surely. And so there's some things in these final years of transition where the leadership of this church and where the direction of this church has a previous generation that has been in leadership. There's going to need to be a change in that leadership, and there's also going to need to be some outreach that takes place to bring in other young couples that have children, that have youth age children. And it will be a great opportunity for this church to set the stage for the next generation. You know, when a church has a number of children that are in a youth department, I've just noticed this over the years in other churches that I've pastored, but when a church begins to have a youth department, and we're just a few years away here from having The children that Debbie has been teaching, and Judy and Linda, as they come on up, we're going to have, if nothing changes, we're going to have a strong youth department here at one time. And that gives a church an opportunity to reach out into the community. And there's something about that would allow us to reach people and say, we have a strong, godly, biblical youth department in our church, and to reach those that God would have us to reach. And it's just a great opportunity. Now, God builds His church. Don't misunderstand. We know that this church belongs to Christ, and He will build His church how He wants it to be built. And He may not want it to grow to be any type of large church or anything of that nature. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm simply saying is that we need to be aware. And those of us who are in that older generation, we're putting down our final footprints for that younger generation to follow. And I want to urge you and say to you that needs to be strong footprints that we continue to lay down all the way to the end. We need to set a good example for those that come behind us. We need to be thinking about them and what they're seeing from us and what they're learning from us. And to the younger generation, I would simply say this: you need to be observing, but not only observing, you need to begin to get more and more involved in the things that it will take for this church to continue in the years to come. And so can you say amen to that this morning? Now, this word generations is a word that comes up quite often in the book of Genesis. In fact, you can set up the division of the church or division of the book of Genesis by this word generations when you see it in the Bible. And sometimes it's translated history, sometimes it's translated other things. Mostly this Hebrew word is translated generations. In Genesis 2:4, and I'm just going to run through these very quickly. It talks about the history of the heavens and the earth. And so that's really kind of in the opening section of Genesis. And then it talks about the genealogy of Adam. Next, the genealogy of Noah. If you have a King James, it's probably the word generations there. Genesis 10:1, the genealogy of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah. But then it zeroes in on Shem, and it says the genealogy of Shem. Next comes the genealogy of Terah. That was the father of Abram. And it tells about his sons there. In chapter 25, we saw the genealogy of Ishmael. And the way it works with the way that God laid it out in His Word, He would take someone like Ishmael who was not part of the people of God, and He would give their genealogy just very briefly, just in a short section of verses. But then the attention was turned to the one who would be the main one in the line of God's people, and that became Isaac in chapter 25, verse 19. And then in chapter 36, verses 1 and 9, we saw the genealogy of Esau. And then that brings us back to our verse now, the history or the genealogy, the generations of Jacob. Now there's another verse, another way that in the Old Testament, something that it's a phrase that comes up a number of times in the Old Testament, a phrase, and I think it goes right along with what we're talking about this morning. And it's the phrase generation to generation. The Bible talks about from age to age or from generation to generation. Isaiah, just look at these verses. Isaiah 51 verse 8. My righteousness will be forever, and my salvation from generation to generation. And all of these are about God. These are great verses about God and who He is and His eternality. Lamentations 5:19, you, O Lord, remain forever. Your throne from generation to generation. And I'll just stop right here and pause before we read any further, and just it comes to my mind to say this, that the same God that some of us who are older, who have served for all these years and we've lived for Him and He has cared for us and He's led us along the way, that song that we sang a few minutes ago, He leadeth me. He's led us all along the way, and you younger people can have this great encouragement. It's the same God who led us who will be leading you there in the future. Daniel chapter 4, verse 3 says His dominion is from generation to generation. Daniel 4:34, His dominion is an everlasting dominion, and His kingdom is from generation to generation. And one last verse, Joel 3:20, it says, Judah shall abide forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation. And so God in His Word speaks about this transition that takes place. People are born into this world, they live their lives, they grow old, and they die, and the other generations come behind them, but God remains the same forever and ever. And that's a great encouragement to us. Now, I want to use the outline that I gave you earlier just to say a few things to us this morning. Our preaching and teaching. What are we going to be preaching and teaching in the coming year, 2026? Well, we're going to finish the book of Genesis. We have 14 chapters left to finish the book of Genesis. Sometime I'm expecting, sometime in February, by the 1st of March at the latest, we should finish the book of Genesis. And what the Lord, I believe, is leading me to go to next are the writings of John in the Bible. And so we're going to go through the Gospel of John. It'll take us a couple of years to do that, if the Lord allows us to live and do that. And we're going to go through the letters from the Apostle John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And then we'll, Lord willing, look at the book of Revelation. On Wednesday nights, we have an opportunity, I think next year, because we have some new families that are in our church. Some of them have not been Christians for very long. And so what we're going to do on our Wednesday night studies is we're going to look at some material that has to do with the fundamentals of the faith. And this is some workbook type material that we're going to go through. We're going to step aside from our study in the minor prophets for this year. But this particular study deals with basic biblical Christianity. And if you're already a seasoned Christian and you've been around for a while, I want to encourage you to come and be a part of this, because one of the things that you would be able to do on these Wednesday nights is maybe help some of the others that are not as well versed in these fundamentals. And so we'll be telling you more about that as we get close to it. But Wednesday night is a great time. It's one of the times of our church where the fellowship, you have that opportunity on Wednesday night in that setting in our fellowship hall to really get to know one another, to hear prayer concerns from other people, and to be concerned about them and be able to pray for the things that are in their lives. And so I would encourage you to make Wednesday night an important part of your weekly schedule. You know, I mentioned in last year's annual message, and Judy mentioned the title of it. It was So Much the More was the title of last year's message. And I mentioned in there that we really have here in our church, and it's by design, we don't have a lot of programs and activities where you feel like you have to be at the church every night. But what we do have is a couple of hours on Sunday morning and about 1 hour on Wednesday night. And so it's what I call sometimes church light. But we do it that way because we don't want to wear people out. I've been in churches before, pastored churches before, where people just get wore out having to be a part of something all the time. But all we ask here really is Sunday mornings and Wednesday night. And so I want to encourage you to do that. During the summer, we have a summer Bible study. And it's a very special, usually some type of video series. It's very good, very, very well done usually. We'll have something again this summer. And then in the fall, our elders teach on Wednesday nights. And so I would encourage you to come and be a part of our Wednesday night study. And then the final thing that I would mention is our Sunday morning Bible study. We have classes for all ages, for children of all ages. And then, of course, our adults meet here in the sanctuary during that time. And if you're not coming for Bible study on Sunday morning, not bringing your children to that, I would encourage you to do that. It's such an important time of the week. And I would say this, and I've said it many times before and would say it again, for you that are adults, if you're not coming to hear Brother Fred teach on Sunday mornings, you're missing out on one of the great opportunities God has given you in your life. And I would just say there's really, I can't see an excuse for not being a part of that class. He's one of the best Bible teachers that I've ever heard. And so I would just say, come be a part of it on Sunday mornings. And then our outreach for this year. And I want to challenge you to do something very specific this year. And it starts this afternoon, okay? As far as our outreach is concerned, I want you to find a family or some individual that you will begin to pray for. Let the Lord place someone on your heart. Don't be hasty in making this choice. Just ask the Lord to show you somebody that's in your sphere of influence in your life, some family that you might could reach for the Lord. And pray, begin to pray. Once the Lord has put somebody on your heart or some family on your heart, begin to pray for that family or that individual. And then befriend them. Have them over to your house for coffee and cake or for a meal. Invite them to come to church with you. And then continue to pray and witness and to love that family. You know, sometimes we feel like the command of the Lord to reach the whole world it can be overwhelming. But you can let the Lord put somebody on your heart that you would begin to pray for. And just pray for them. And then befriend them. Get to know them. Invite them to church. Witness. Love them. There's an old hymn that we used to sing. And some of you remember this. Lord, lay some soul upon my heart. How many of you remember that old hymn? Let me just read these words to you. They're on the screen. Lord, lay some soul upon my heart and love that soul through me. And may I bravely do my part to win that soul for thee. The chorus goes like this. Some soul for thee, some soul for thee. This is my earnest plea. Help me each day on life's highway to win some soul for thee. Lord, lay some soul upon my heart. That's the first step in this. And the second step is to love that soul through me. And I believe every one of us here could do that. There's a verse that I ran across in terms of the word generation. It's part of the great Magnificat by Mary in Luke chapter 1. And she had been told that she would be the one who would bear the Messiah. And she just begins to sing this praise or to say this praise to God in such a great way. In Luke chapter 1 verse 50, it says, His mercy is on those who fear Him from generation to generation. And I thought about how that's really the message of the church, that the mercy of God is on those who fear Him from generation to generation. In other words, our message is that anyone who wants mercy can come to Christ and have mercy. Anyone who would come to Christ, He says He will not turn them away. And so our invitation and our message to the world and our witnessing to the world is that there is mercy in the Lord Jesus Christ. And I would say to anyone here today who's never come to Christ for mercy, you better do it now. There's no guarantee that there would be opportunities in the future. Come to Christ today. If you want mercy, now if you want affirmation of how good you are, it doesn't work. But if you say, oh, I need mercy, I'm a great sinner and I need God's mercy, He will give it to you through His Son, Jesus Christ. And then with our fellowship, we're going to continue to have our regular fellowship meals. These are great times together. And I would encourage you again this year, I would say this, and I noticed that you didn't listen last year when I suggested this, so I want to mention it again this year. When we have those fellowships, maybe take your plate, instead of sitting in the same little group of people all the time, move about a little bit, get to know some other people. There's some of you that I got to know this last year a little better just because I made an effort to do that. And then we're going to have some young adult fellowships. We've already been having some of these, and this is a great opportunity for our young adults to reach out and invite others to come and be a part of that. We'll probably have 2 or 3 of those in the coming year. And we are going to have a membership pictorial directory. Some of you said, hey, I have a hard time remembering names. I used to be like that, but I've made an effort to try to know people's names. But this directory will help us. It will be something that will help us to get to know others. We'll have a list there of grandchildren and things like that, that we can get to know other people and what's going on in their lives. And so this would be a great blessing and an addition to our fellowship. And then the final thing is the challenge. And I've really already issued that as far as finding a family or finding an individual that you can pray for and befriend and love and invite them to church. But I wanted to issue this challenge for each of us, and I include myself in this. And this is something I heard back early in the week this week. There was a football coach for one of the major universities, and he challenged his team. They had a rough game last week, but here's how he said it, and it caught my attention. He said, I want to challenge each of us, and here's how he put it, to step up our game. And when I first heard that, I said, well, he's just asking them to give a little bit more. And by the way, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but his team won the game yesterday, and they attributed it to the fact that everybody on that team had given a little bit more effort than they had been given. And I believe the local church is what God has designed for us to live out our Christian lives through. Now, there's other things outside the local church that we are to be involved in. I'm not discounting any of those things, but our primary way of living out the Christian life is to be involved with other Christians and to be involved in a local church and to be witnessing and reaching people and inviting them to come in. And so I want to invite you and want to challenge you to do that. Step up your game. Let God search your heart. How can you do just not a lot more? We're not going to become a demanding Pharisaical type church. But just what can you do to give a little more, put a little more into the church here at Grace Baptist Church? And I believe if you would do that, God would bless you for it. I believe He'd honor it. And I believe it would be a blessing for years to come in this church. So generational change, whether we like it or not, if the Lord tarries, it's coming. And we need to be looking at how we can prepare this church to have a strong future in this community in the years ahead.